I've lost track of just how many cities we've visited on our journey around the world so far. Over 100, maybe over 200. To date, we've driven our vehicle over amazing bridges, on legendary streets and avenues, and past monumental squares on 4 continents. Some of the cities we've left behind include Helsinki, Moscow, Mexico City, Manaus, Buenos Aires and Cape Town. Well, now we're about to trade all these places in for an uninhabited landscape. Namibia is just a name, but that name is now about to come to life as the next big adventure on our journey. Sand covers a great part of the country, an unforgiving landscape for man, empty. Namibia will offer us a road all to ourselves. Among the dunes and steppes, we'll drive up the coast and wonder about the deserts further inland. We'll travel around the country from tip to tip with the aim of discovering this nation's original inhabitants, the Himba tribal communities. These men and women inhabit the northern villages beyond the deserts. Chapter 11. Beyond the Deserts. We realize that there are over 1,500 miles of dirt road ahead of us, so we'll have to get up at the crack of dawn. Just outside the remote village of Ayais, we set off on a new leg of our journey around the world. This place has become a legendary rest stop among the major routes that crisscross the continent. Just take a look at this landscape and you'll understand why.
Junto al cañón del río Fish vamos a iniciar el recorrido por uno de los países más sorprendentes de África. Namibia significa en lengua nativa la nada, pero nosotros os podemos asegurar que entre sus desiertos hay muchas cosas que ver.
Some parts of Namibia, the nothingness, are barren. There's no sign of life, at least not as far as the eye can see. One such example of this is the Fish River Pass. This canyon is 650 million years old. It is one of the longest canyons in the world. Over the centuries, the plateau has dried up, and barely a handful of creatures still inhabit this land. But we still have a long road ahead of us. To reach a place inhabited by human beings, we'll have to head for the coast. It's almost a full day's journey. The landscape's a bit gentler, and all we find are a few ostriches by the road. They're the only creatures that disrupt traffic along the southern highways. And of course, they have the right of way. In this habitat, the only other survivors are some bushes and a few scattered species of trees that have grown used to the heat and desolation. Aside from that, there's just the dust on the road. And now the road is about to take us to a city on the Atlantic coast, close to the desert and far away from the rest of the world. It's nice to reach a place where we are not alone and drive on paved roads after traveling on all those dirt tracks. At first glance, Luderitz looks like a strange city that seems a bit out of place in the African landscape. It is enclosed between the desert dunes and the currents of the Atlantic Ocean. In 1884, a man called Adolf Luderitz decided that this place had the potential to become an import port for the German colony in Namibia. He somehow managed to set up a fish farm, and the little seaside town gradually began to grow. That was over a century ago. But today, as we walk around the city, the German influence is still evident in its tidy neighborhoods, Lutheran churches, and the Art Nouveau design of some of its streets. We can even see some of the palaces from that time. How can a fishing community like this one possibly thrive? The answer is diamonds, and their consequences are more plainly visible just a few kilometers from Luderitz. In the ghost town known as Koolmanskop, the history of this part of the world has clearly left its mark. During the First World War, many Germans sought financing here, either for the war or for their own personal projects. Walking around Koolmanskop, we find the desolation of a place abandoned in a hurry. As soon as the diamonds began to run out, they all left. All at once. This town had its own casino, several ballrooms and schools. Nowadays you can walk by the workers' huts or take a peek inside the mansions that once belonged to the mine's owners. All around, there's nothing but sand. Some of these homes have been preserved. They take us back to the early 19th century and transport us thousands of miles away. Koolmanskop once housed the first X-ray machine on the African continent. It was used to make sure the workers had not swallowed any stones. And this is what's left of the hospital. The rooms and wards have long been deserted. But as we all know, no hospital can possibly cure diamond fever. And even today, its symptoms are evident. We'd best not tempt fate and just continue on our way. Back on the inland roads, we're alone again with just a few stray ostriches for company. The roads stretch out for countless miles and the landscape's becoming increasingly arid. We're moving away from diamonds in search of a different sort of treasure. There are no towns in the very heart of the desert, only a few man-made oases. For the past 2 years, we've been alternating between cramped hostels, nights spent on the road, and once in a while, hotels like this one. So we're going to relax for a few hours and recover our strength before moving on, because this time, the road promises to be overwhelming. Even from the car window, we can already sense the valley's magic. Stretching along either side of the road, the huge wall of sand begins to close in on us. We've just reached the Sossusvlei Valley at the heart of the Namib. The asphalt vanishes at the end of the valley, From this point on, the desert is upon us. We'll have to continue traveling along sandy roads, and this becomes more and more complicated. At this point, the Namib begins to look like a movie set. Its geometry is perfect, and the play of light and shadow is accentuated once the sun begins to set. This is one of the world's most rugged terrains, but some trees manage to survive the climate. I also wonder how the oryx managed to survive here. It seems the sand wants to cover everything. Any form of life feels completely out of place here. Out of all the dunes in the valley, there's one that stands out from the rest. So-called Dune 45 is the most photographed dune in the park, and perhaps the sleekest, if you can possibly call a mountain of sand sleek. The dune threatens to engulf everything in its path, but plant life manages to resist at the foot of a giant that rises 984 feet high. Some trees have already succumbed. We are all completely mesmerized by this desolate landscape.
Este es el color rojo de la tierra de Namibia. Nos hemos acercado al valle de Sossusvlei, donde se encuentran las dunas más altas del mundo. Pero para ver la dimensión del desierto, vamos a tener que madrugar y realizar un viaje muy especial.
The day ahead of us will be long and exciting. So, before we continue, let's run a little memory check. In 1.5 years on the road, we've covered 50,000 miles by car, but our 4x4 isn't the only means of transport we've used. If I remember correctly, we've also trudged along on foot, ridden boats and rafts, pickups, amphibious vehicles, barges, kayaks, canoes, cable cars, zip lines, rubber dinghies, sailboats, trains, light aircraft, commercial airplanes, helicopters, tuk-tuks, sleds drawn by snowmobiles, and dogs, mules, donkeys, horses and camels. But of all these means of transport, there is one that is my personal favorite. The hot air balloon. The idea is to fly over the Namib aboard a balloon aircraft. Everything must be ready by dawn, because it's the best time to avoid the strongest wind currents. It takes a while for the hot air to swell inside the fabric, and we're really revved up to go when we finally set off.
Todo está preparado, nos han llamado a bordo y nos vamos a viajar en globo. Bueno, el primer paso a un viaje espectacular.
Watch out for your head. All right.
¡Qué día! Un día espléndido ha salido. ¡Vamos, José Luis, que nos vamos!
Balloons don't fly, they float. Being gently rocked by the wind is soothing and pleasurable. There's no sense of vertigo because everything looks so unreal from up here, as if someone had painted a landscape under our feet. From north to south, the Namib spreads out along 994 uninhabitable miles. Some of these dunes stand more than 1,200 feet tall. We're now entirely at the wind's mercy, but none of us seems to mind just drifting along. Among other reasons, because we know the pilot to be highly skilled and experienced.
Nos encontramos con Denis, el piloto de uno de los globos aerostáticos a más de 800 metros ahora sobre las dunas más altas del mundo. Denis,
Yes,
this is the best way to see this desert.
that is for sure. It's the best viewpoint. You have nothing separating you between the infinity of the Namib Desert. It's really beautiful. We are going at the same speed of the wind with the wind. So we have no clue where we are going, but we know it's going to be beautiful.
This is part of the adventure.
That's right. Excuse me 1 second, I have to keep it hot.
All right.
Something about this landscape is especially bizarre. Those circles in the middle of nowhere. Some say fungus prevents vegetation from growing inside the circles. Others say the land's saline properties created them. And, of course, still others defend the theory that visiting space aliens left these marks. In any case, I don't think it really matters all that much. But it's certainly true that this land full of craters, with the dunes in the background, looks like a different planet. Namib Sky Balloon's flight crew has found a spot for us to land, and that's where we're now headed. We're about to make a landing. Everything's all set. At breakfast, we share a table with several tourists from another balloon. It's no wonder we're all feeling especially cheerful this morning.
We're a place to breakfast, huh?
Hey, it's not so bad to start the day.
Not too bad to start the day. And with
Good champagne,
good champagne to celebrate.
good breakfast.
Yeah,
Not a bad spot. It's the biggest restaurant in the world.
it's the best views in the world, maybe, yeah? Watch your eye, huh?
Okay.
All right.
All right. 1, 2, 3.
All right.
Ole.
We've just flown over the Namib Desert, and now we're sipping champagne over breakfast in front of the red dunes.
Yo creo que hay que brindar también con nuestro amigo Alfonso, nuestro cámara inestimable detrás siempre de la cámara. No bebas mucho que luego te sale borroso.
Cheers.
Este es el momento en el que hay que decir qué trabajo más duro tenemos.
I'll drink to that.
Salud.
Our itinerary zigzags from the seaside back inland and vice versa. We are now headed towards the tourist towns on the country's coastline. But even there, it's impossible to escape the desert. The cities we'll visit have adopted two parallel functions, as seaports and as the country's main holiday centres. Walvis Bay is one of them. Its buildings give us that same weird impression we felt while visiting Lüderitz. Africa? Once again, it looks as if we had crossed the desert only to arrive back in Germany. This city was under the rule of the British Empire for some time. During the First World War, the Germans briefly made it part of their own colony, but South Africa eventually managed to gain control of the city. Its inhabitants had to wait until 1994 to fully realize that they were actually citizens of Namibia. All along the Namibian coastline, you'll find the same early 20th century splendor. Swakopmund is a favorite resort among Namibia's high society. It's full of peaceful restaurants, and its pristine streets have little to do with the chaos found in other African cities. The stalls selling crafts are a clear symptom of the influx of tourism. In these markets, the black community gathers to sell their pieces to foreigners and to their white fellow countrymen. But today, the whites are out on the streets celebrating a German holiday. Yes, I also find all of this extremely odd. Most of Swakopmund's inhabitants speak German. They drink German beer and follow the Bundesliga, and in general, they all seem to have blonde, German-looking hair. Today, these are majorettes parading through the streets of a desert town in Namibia. We came to this country hoping to discover its tribal communities and learn about the traditions and customs of the first natives to inhabit these lands. But up until now, all we've found are exact replicas of typical German customs and traditions. Just as we saw in South Africa, whites and blacks in Namibia also share the same physical spaces. But their peaceful coexistence is still only relative. It's clear to us that we need to move away from the tourist towns, so we decide to continue due north and visit some of the country's most remote villages. These are the gates that lead to Skeleton Coast Park. We've been told that today we will be the only visitors in this strange nature reserve. We won't find any other tourists or cars. There's no one else here. The climate in this region is ruthless, and the ocean's currents often drag boats or marine species on the shore. Death spreads out all along the coastline. Since there are no towns along this road, we'll have to drive all night long. This time, there is at least some traffic on the roads, although it's not exactly made up of other vehicles. It's obvious we are fast approaching one of the largest nature reserves in the world. Another new gate leads us to a new nature reserve. From here on, we'll be entering the wilderness.
Uno de los principales atractivos de Namibia es sin duda su fauna salvaje. En el Parque Nacional de Tosa es posible ver, siempre que acompañe la suerte, a los grandes felinos, a los elefantes, rinocerontes, jirafas. Esta es la concentración de especies que el espectáculo está garantizado.
Yes, a show. That's how it feels when we look around, no matter what direction we look inside the park. We've run into some of our old acquaintances again. Jumping gazelles, or springboks. Their mere presence indicates that it's best we stay inside the car. After all, they're predators would be just as happy to prey on us. Zebras are also abundant here. Some 6,000 of them live in Etosha. We are determined to cross the park from west to east. That means we'll have to drive across 217 miles of savanna and lowland forest. Tourism makes it possible to maintain the nature reserves, and this in turn makes it possible for the animals that tourism depends on to survive. The fact is that today, Etosha ensures the survival of nearly 600 species. During the dry season, the animals have no choice but to head for the park's watering holes. So that's where we go to wait for them to appear. In places like this, everyone is on guard. Whether it's to hunt or to avoid being hunted. But there's one species that lives outside this norm. Elephants don't need to hunt, and of course no predator would dare take on a 7-ton pachyderm. They're unrivaled. Perhaps that's why they walk so calmly. As far as we're concerned, the car is our only life insurance. And even that's not always certain. It's worth crossing the country from south to north just to drive through these prairies. We had not initially planned on stopping at Etosha National Park, but let's face it, who could possibly resist the many charms of Africa's wilderness? There's a place near the park whose interest lies in a much more universal element. It's not technically part of Namibia, or Africa, or even planet Earth. This enormous rock is none other than the largest meteorite ever found. It landed here over 80,000 years ago, and today we can touch the alien texture of its more than 60 tons of metal from who knows what remote galaxy. It's possible that, much like us, the meteor was simply drawn to the desert landscapes of Namibia.
Vaya leñazo debió de pegar esto.
But now it's time to abandon the landscapes, fauna and rocks in search of our fellow human beings. We'll have to backtrack down the same road to reach the most important city in the north, right on the border with Angola. We will soon discover that Opuwo looks absolutely nothing like other cities we've seen along the coast. There are no colonial buildings here, no white communities, and no German neighborhoods. All that's left in Opuwo are the country's native tribes. And the culture shock is really fascinating. Suddenly, I find myself recording a society that actually blends into the African setting. Nevertheless, Opuwo is a fairly modest urban center. It's the most important town in the region, but it has less than 5,000 inhabitants. Its streets are lined with markets where time passes at a leisurely pace around outdoor stands that sell victuals such as tripe. To understand Opuwo's reality, you have to go back 100 years. The colonial settlers perpetrated such brutal genocide that they pushed the natives to the brink of extinction. Some surviving natives converted to Christianity. They formed a group known as the Herero, which today is easily distinguished by the women's dresses, styled to imitate 19th century European fashion. However, most of the natives recovered their original roots. Now we are finally learning about the Namibian people's true identity. Unfortunately, the lack of resources is closely linked to that identity. The Ojavambo occupy the last rung on the social ladder. They are born and raised in the poorest neighborhoods. As many as 5 generations live together within these hollow walls, with no beds, water, or future. Although, come to think of it, we're the ones who equate comfort with progress. Maybe it's not quite as important for them. Throughout our journey, we've had the privilege of visiting tribes from all over the world. But no indigenous community has impressed us quite as much as the Himbas. It's hard to believe that this tribe shares the Herero's bloodline and their language. However, they alone represent the original spirit of the people of northern Namibia. When Dan approaches a group of women, they no longer behave quite as naturally.
How are you?
In recent years, a new element has appeared that is threatening the Himba's cultural integrity. Tourism. In this part of the country, tourism is by no means a mass phenomenon. But it seems travelers are beginning to arrive. For some Himba, our presence here represents the chance to earn a few dollars, and our camera acts as an added incentive. We've hired a guide to get away from the city for a while. In the countryside, we hope to find a different reality, one more in line with the Himba's long history. A few dirt roads leads us to Ojirumbo, a tiny village that does not appear on any of the maps of the region, and I think that is a very good sign.
Okay, my name is Daniel.
My name, Daniel.
And your name?
Corotina.
Corotina.
Yes.
All right. Nice to meet you. And this is your baby. Oh, hello.
The Himbas seem a bit more trusting than the Apuwo. They even encourage us to take pictures of the children. But there's one thing that strikes us here. There are no men in the village. Most of them have gone off to the markets, so all we find within Ojirumbo's wire fences are a few older men, women, and children. The women live for their own personal beauty, and that's part of the Himba's culture. It takes them hours to braid their hair and cover the braids with mud. They're always ready, as if waiting for someone to arrive at the village in order to admire them. Well, we have arrived today, and we have already been seduced by Africa's most sophisticated style. Everyone pitches in with the housework. Children help grind the corn, using the same tools their ancestors did 200 years ago. In fact, almost nothing has changed for the Himba in recent centuries. Neither their villages, nor their hair, nor even their dances. It seems we are the only novelty here. The day is coming to a close, and the villagers light their fires. We will spend the night in our vehicle, and they will take shelter inside their huts. After nightfall, we receive a surprise visit from some of the children. Eventually, the whole village surrounds our car and begins to serenade us. Everything here happens slowly. At the break of day, the houses are deserted, and they'll only go back inside them to sleep once the sun goes down. But we did manage to sneak into one of these homes. Shooting the inside of one of these huts is like making a still life portrait. It all looks like part of a movie set. And yet nothing here is artificial. Not the vessels used for milk, nor the metal necklaces, nor the blankets hanging on the wall. This is just simply their world. Outside, breakfast is ready. And so a new day begins in the village. The Himba have managed to make us feel right at home, despite our cultural differences. Jose Luis even acted as a doctor for one of the women. Our first aid kit is like a full-fledged hospital for them. There's no drinking water in Ojirumbo, nor are there any roads or even markets. Although they did decide to build a school just a few miles from the village. All right, so it's just a canvas tent out in the open, but there is a teacher there who is determined to educate children.
Hello, say hello. Now I'm going with the hello, no? Hello.
Hello. Hola. 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 Buenos días.
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 Koto wahama.
Koto wahama.
Rugo.
Koto wahama.
Bambi is a traveling teacher. Every day, he travels these roads for miles in order to reach different villages. Today, he is teaching them to read in the Himba language. Jose Luis and Dan sit in on the class.
Ovanatie maveri o muriro mau yaka.
Thank you.
Many of these children will never finish elementary school, but this teacher does not give up. His dream is that one day some of them will attend university. We leave them here for now, under a tent with no desks. But in any case, the children's presence combined with the teacher's tenacity make this a school. After class, they spontaneously bid us farewell in the best way they know.
I see that the school is a tent.
Yeah.
Why is a tent?
Because it is normally a project school, and also the They bring a tent so that we can move with him because the school is mobile to go around where the homestead is going.
And which are the biggest problems you have to teach the kids?
Having some problem because they are not attending the primary school. So that's only the problem, but because they are not focusing so easy. It's difficult to focusing on teaching or studying something.
Nowadays, it's difficult for a Himba to thrive in Namibian society. However, some people, such as Bambi, seek to strike a balance between preserving native identity and gaining access to a decent education. While Jose Luis stays behind talking with the teacher, Dan returns to the village. The women have prepared an impressive display of crafts, and we feel obliged to buy something from them because they have been such great hostesses. It's a fair deal, but it's also a clear indication that we are not the first foreigners to visit Ojirumbo. We are headed towards a remote village located right on the banks of a river. We won't find any men here either. Just women carrying children on their backs. And each and every one of them, from the teenagers to the elders, primps compulsively. If there's one thing that distinguishes the Himba from any other society on earth, it's their red makeup, which they obtain by preparing a mixture of ochre powder and animal fat. It protects them from the sun, but is mostly used to enhance their beauty. They want to give us a practical demonstration, with Dan as the guinea pig.
Bueno, esta es la loción de barro que ellas se aplican en todo el cuerpo y que les da ese color tan particular a los Himbas.
Once they reach adulthood, they never remove their makeup. They apply this stuff each and every day. You might say that the ochre lotion is like a second skin.
Bueno, primer paso para convertirse en un auténtico Himba. Utilizar su loción de barro.
Agua.
Perinawa.
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 Agua.
Danki.
Dangi. Chikuya kabulo rumen. Hindi ukuja churi kana lona. Baba ulio chata. Ulie mundo mu. Kakujanga hino kijero mutenya kajijere mutenya. Kijere mutenya kajijere lomwe. Kijere ulio ngudenji. Tinga woyo mulandu wanje ne hoyo ingulami. Kulo kubaba tinga munji basane hi. Muhoka jinga tola hapa manawe penduka wasana nkole.
Yeah, even sometimes if you are like maybe you are the boyfriend to her, and then if you say, okay, my girlfriend, I will come tonight, so she will apply okra, and then if you wake up tomorrow morning, you will look like this.
As night falls, we say our goodbyes like all visitors here do traditionally, accepting a souvenir in the form of a necklace, a pendant, or some other craft. However, these women will be here night after night, lighting their fires with that purely Himba primitive air of theirs. Our guide explains that several communities are about to gather at a nearby village in order to celebrate a festivity commemorating one of their former leaders. The village chief is the host at this event, and the best seats are reserved for him. These communities are governed by their own rules, which have little to do with the laws of the state of Namibia. The tribal leaders meet to dispense justice at their discretion, and they are also the ones who decide whether or not we can stay. Fines are traditionally paid with heads of cattle. Murdering a woman commands a lower fine than murdering a man. Polygamy is sanctioned. However, a man may not spend more than 2 nights in a row with the same woman. This prevents the other wives from feeling neglected. Aside from that, life revolves around the cattle. Every day, the corral gates are opened to let the animals, which have practically the same privileges as men do, out to graze. But today is a special day, so they've sacrificed a cow. And of course, no part of it goes to waste. During the social gathering, men and women stay separate. The men are in charge of cooking the meat, and at lunchtime, it seems they have no intention of waiting for anyone. And the women would never dare sit next to the men. The young men find us amusing. They soon volunteered to take us on a tour of the village. And nothing amuses them more than some people's lack of skill at tanning leather. Meanwhile, the women do their best to look impeccable. The inside of the hut looks somewhat like a native dressing room. One feels here as though one were invading the Himba's sanctuary. And in a way, that's what we've been doing these last few days. We've entered their huts with our cameras. We've observed their customs, witnessed their dances, and even made ourselves up like them. It's been about 2,000 miles of asphalt and sand. A trip that has taken us beyond the desert and brought us closer to Namibia's most authentic tribal communities. I guess that's what traveling around the world is about. Loading the backpack with landscapes, new outlooks, new lessons for life. This concludes our tour of one of the most fascinating countries on our trip. We have ventured into a place known as the nothingness, only to discover that in nothingness there is room for everyone.